Morning everyone. Today we're looking at King Duncan from Macbeth. We'll look at a few different ways the character could be interpreted with quotations to support. And there's a practice exam style question at the end of the video for you to try out too. Make sure you subscribe if you're interested in more Macbeth revision videos and more English literature videos too. The links to these slides are below if you want them. Let's get started. Now let's work on the assumption that you've been given a nice open-ended question like the one on the screen. Duncan's a pretty minor character, and as you can see, he only speaks in 3 scenes. Mainly because, spoiler alert, he gets murdered at the start of Act 2, and that kicks off the descent of the Macbeths. So he's kind of a major character in that respect. Without his death, there wouldn't really be much of a story. For an interesting addition to your essays, why not read up on the real Duncan I of Scotland, who ruled from 1034 to 1040, and who was, you guessed it, killed by a guy called Macbeth, though not in the same way that Shakespeare made up. First off, we'll look at Duncan being well respected in the play. There's loads of evidence to support this. Ross turns up in Act 1 Scene 2 and rather than saying hello or some other greeting, he says God save the king. He then addresses Duncan directly with the epithet Great King. Straight away it's established that Duncan is a good king, people like him and respect him, and there's a clear link between the kingship and religion. The belief in the divine right of kings is established. A little later, Duncan meets Macbeth and Banquo to thank them for their performance on the battlefield. He talks about rewarding them, and Macbeth replies with, "The service and loyalty I owe in doing it pays itself." Essentially, the privilege of being able to serve you is all the payment that I need. You could argue that this means Macbeth really respects Duncan, as this is before Malcolm is announced as next in line to the throne. Or you could say that Macbeth is just sucking up to Duncan, because the witches have made their prophecies, and being the king is on Macbeth's mind. Either way, Macbeth follows this up with, "Our duties are to your throne," by doing everything safe towards your love and honour. He says that he's loyal to the throne, the country, Duncan's family, everyone and everything Duncan is associated with, basically. A mark of clear respect. Macbeth is clearly deferential towards Duncan. After he's discussed it with his wife, Macbeth starts to have doubts. He notes that Duncan is so loved, so well respected, that his death would cause too many tears amongst the population. And this makes him speak to Lady Macbeth and say, "No, we're not going ahead with the assassination. I can't kill him, especially when he's honoured me this much. I've got a great reputation now, it'd be a shame to throw it all away." Obviously, Macbeth lost that argument because he then kills Duncan at the end of the next scene. It's interesting that a lot of the quotes about Duncan being respected are from Macbeth, the man who killed him. And it could be said that murdering someone in their sleep is a mark of disrespect. Macduff is the one who discovers the body in Act 2 Scene 2. He uses some great dramatic language invoking religious imagery and giving us the sense that Duncan was the true God-anointed king, and gives us a sense that Duncan's death is a catastrophic loss for the people of Scotland. And this is also backed up in Act 2 Scene 3 when Ross and the old man are talking, and they basically say that even nature respected Duncan. The fact that his death caused nature to lose control can be explained by the Great Chain of Being. Check out my video on that for more information. And when speaking to Malcolm later on, Macduff again brings up the link between Duncan and God, utmost respect. For Duncan being presented as a good leader, there's a treasure trove of quotes, too many to list here, but it's clear that Duncan's awesomeness as a king is supposed to juxtapose with Macbeth's kingship, a leadership style that describes Black Macbeth as a tyrant that causes widows to howl, orphans to cry, and Scotland to bleed, if you ask Macduff. When he finds out about Macbeth's performance on the battlefield, Duncan calls him valiant and worthy. And he also calls Ross worthy too. He's full of praise for the people who serve him. When the captain is through with his report, Duncan is quick to get him the medical help that he needs. But being a good leader in 11th century Scotland isn't all just about dishing out compliments. He's also fierce in that he condemns Cawdor to death, but also quite fair in that he rewards those who have done well for him and for the country. And this is also backed up when Ross and Angus greet Macbeth in Act 1 Scene 3. They talk about Duncan's praise and his thanks and his honour. When he actually meets Macbeth and Banquo, he tells them that they've done more for him than he could pay them. He realises that he couldn't be where he is without them, so he heaps on the praise. He gives them about as much respect as they give him. But he also gives credit where it's due. He speaks directly to Banquo and tells him that he's awesome as well. Now compare this to Macbeth in Act 5, when he's calling one servant a cream-faced loon and telling another servant to hang any of his subjects who talk of fear. Very different styles of leadership. Act 1 Scene 6 is full of Duncan's compliments. There's a clear semantic field of love and praise throughout. A few of the phrases he reserves for Lady Macbeth here. In Macbeth's Act 1 Scene 7 soliloquy, Macbeth talks about how good of a king Duncan really is. He talks about how he's so modest, so honourable, so faultless, that the angels would be more than a little upset if Duncan were to be murdered. And then, to top it off, Banquo gives Macbeth a diamond and says, "Here's a present for your wife from Duncan." Not only is he full of praise, he's generous too. Now keep in mind that in the entire play, Duncan speaks about 18 times, and the vast majority of what he says is praising, rewarding, or respecting other people. In this play about Scottish kings, Shakespeare is clearly trying to show us what a good one looks like. A few quotes that show Duncan as wise now. He says that there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face, essentially that people can be deceiving. You can't judge a book by its cover. It's wise that he knows this and realises it. Just unfortunate that in the next scene, the Macbeth's plot is murder, and Lady Macbeth gives her "look like the innocent flower but be the serpent under it" quote, basically confirming all that Duncan says here. And Duncan says, "I have begun to plant thee and will labour to make thee full of growing." Now, there's a bit of evolution here. In the scene just before, Banquo talks to the witches about the seeds of time and saying which will grow and which will not. Duncan then talks about planting thee and labouring to make thee full of growing. Then Banquo replies, "If I grow, the harvest is your own." So we've got the seed, the planting, the growing, the harvest, an entire life cycle right there. Either way, Duncan recognises potential in his thanes. In quite a fatherly way, really. He talks about coaching them into greatness. In a bit of a proverb-sounding quote, Duncan says, "Signs of nobleness, like stars, shall shine on all deservers." Basically, people who do great things get great things, which is mirrored quite nicely in Macbeth's "Stars hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires" quote in the same scene. Then back to this quote again. Duncan knows that he needs to reward those who do good for him and punish those who betray him. Finally, let's consider the evidence that Duncan is a doomed man. His fate is sealed pretty early on, and it's repeatedly foreshadowed in a heavy-handed way. First off, he's betrayed by the Thane of Cawdor. So the Thane of Cawdor is killed, and as a result, Duncan gives Macbeth the title. But then Macbeth, as the new Thane of Cawdor, also betrays Duncan, and is also killed as a result. Duncan says that Cawdor was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust. Interesting that Macbeth then enters the scene at that exact moment. A man who Duncan builds an absolute trust upon, but then betrays him. Basically, Duncan doesn't seem the best at choosing the right people to trust. Lady Macbeth seals Duncan's fate in Scene 5 with the Raven himself, his horse, that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan. And also, "O never shall sun that morrow see." Quite a lot of death imagery used alongside Duncan's name. The next from Macbeth, who tells us of his treachery, his double trust. A good host doesn't usually kill the guests. He should protect the king from murderers, not hold the backstabbing knife himself. And finally, Lady Macbeth rings a bell to signal the coast is clear. Macbeth walks towards Duncan's chamber, and these are the last words spoken before Duncan is killed. "Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell." A good little thought experiment is to try and think of reasons why Shakespeare decided not to show the murder of Duncan on the stage. It's one of the most important plot points, yet it happens between Act 2 Scenes 1 and Scene 2. Let me know your ideas in the comments. Now here's a challenge question for you. Starting with this extract, explain how you think Shakespeare presents King Duncan. You can use any of the quotes from this video to help you. If you're going to have a go at the question, pause the video and give it a crack. The best way to get better is to write a practice response, ask for feedback, then use that feedback for your next practice response. Then repeat. And that's all for today's video. Thanks for watching and happy revising.